The experiment begins. The lights flickered in the deep space research facility orbiting a dying red star. Metal walls hummed with energy, and the air smelled of sterilized fear. Every sound echoed through the hallways, boots clanking, machines beeping, and whispers of nervous scientists. Inside the main observation deck, men and women in white suits stared at a containment chamber made of black glass. Behind that glass, something moved. Something alive. Something dangerous. Commander Ryn looked at the young human officer standing before him. "Ethan Voss," he said coldly. "Your insubordination leaves me no choice. You'll enter the chamber." The words hit the room like a shockwave. Ethan stood tall, his jaw tight, his eyes sharp. "I'm not afraid," he said. Ryn smirked. "You should be." The last 5 who went in didn't come back. The containment chamber opened with a hiss. Cold mist rolled out like the breath of a sleeping beast. Inside was a single figure. A girl barely 20 by human standards, but her body carried alien markings glowing faintly under the lights. Her silver eyes reflected every movement like a predator's. Her hair was white, tangled, wild, and her claws scraped the steel floor with a metallic sound. Everyone watching held their breath as Ethan stepped forward. The door sealed behind him with a heavy click, trapping him inside. The alien girl stood motionless at first. Watching him, Ethan's heartbeat echoed in his ears, but he didn't raise his weapon. He noticed her trembling slightly, like an animal cornered and afraid. She wasn't roaring or attacking. She was scared. "Hey," he whispered softly. "I'm not here to hurt you." She tilted her head. Confused by his calm voice, her eyes narrowed, and she took a slow step forward, her body tense. From behind the observation glass, the scientist whispered rapidly. "She's focusing on him," one said. "No aggression yet. Wait for it," another replied. "She always attacks after 30 seconds. But 30 seconds passed. Then 60, then 90. Nothing happened. Ethan slowly crouched, removing the small ration pack from his pocket. He placed it on the floor and backed away. The alien girl looked at it, sniffed the air, then crawled closer, her movements cautious, animal-like. Her hand reached out, claws brushing the pack, then she glanced up at him. Ethan smiled, small and careful. "It's food," he said, pointing. "Go ahead." The camera zoomed in as she tore the pack open, sniffed again, and then hesitantly began to eat. Her throat moved slowly, her eyes never leaving Ethan. The commander frowned, tapping his screen. "This is impossible," he muttered. "She killed trained Marines, and now she's eating with him here?" Ethan didn't move. He just sat down quietly on the floor, cross-legged. The alien girl finished the food and made a low, strange sound. Not quite a growl. Not quite a word, it almost sounded like a hum. Ethan blinked, listening. "Are you trying to talk?" he asked softly. Her lips moved again, this time clearer, repeating a single sound. "Huh?" Man, every scientist in the room froze. Commander Ryn leaned forward. "Did she just—" "Yes, sir," someone whispered. "She said human." Ethan's chest tightened. He smiled again. "Yeah," he said gently, tapping his chest. "Human, that's me." She blinked rapidly, as if learning the meaning of the word through his gestures. Her claws lowered, her breathing slowed, and she sat down too, mirroring his position. The tension that filled the chamber began to melt away. Outside, the observers were in disbelief. "This isn't supposed to happen," a scientist muttered. "She's responding emotionally," another replied. "Maybe he triggered a dormant memory response." Commander Ryn narrowed his eyes. "Or maybe he's just lucky." Ethan stayed still, trying not to startle her. He slowly reached for his water flask and rolled it across the floor. The alien caught it, sniffed, then looked up at him again. When he nodded, she tried to mimic him. Sipping it clumsily, spilling a little, she made a noise, half laugh, half curiosity. Ethan chuckled softly. "That's okay. You'll learn." The alien girl tilted her head again, and for the first time her expression softened. Her silver eyes dimmed to a gentle glow instead of sharp light. She reached out her clawed hand. Touching the floor halfway between them, Ethan hesitated, then placed his hand near hers, not touching, just close enough that their reflections met on the metal surface. For the briefest second, it felt like two worlds touching. Predator and prey, soldier and subject, human and alien. A quiet understanding filled the space. From the speaker above, the commander's voice cut through. "Time's up, Voss, back away. We're done here." But Ethan didn't move, he couldn't. Something told him that leaving now would break whatever fragile bridge had just been built. He whispered instead, "I'll come back tomorrow." The alien girl blinked slowly, processing the words, and then nodded once, a small and careful gesture as the guards opened the door and dragged him out. Ethan glanced back. She was still there, sitting in the same spot, clutching the empty water flask like it meant something. The scientists argued among themselves, demanding more tests. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just another experiment. Something had changed, something no one could explain. And as the chamber lights dimmed, the alien girl whispered again to the empty room. Her voice soft, fragile, and almost human. And the first contact the next morning. The facility lights glowed pale blue as Ethan Voss walked through the cold metal corridors. Every guard he passed gave him the same look, a mix of disbelief and pity. No one expected him to come back alive yesterday, yet here he was, standing outside the containment chamber again, waiting for the heavy door to open. Inside the observation deck, Commander Ryn folded his arms. "You're pushing your luck, Voss," he said. "Yesterday was an anomaly, today she'll kill you," Ethan replied calmly. "Or maybe she won't," the commander smirked. "You think she's your friend now? She's a weapon, remember that?" Ethan didn't answer. The door opened and he stepped inside. The alien girl, Lyra, though he didn't yet know her name, was crouched in the corner, tracing strange glowing symbols on the wall with her claws. When she noticed him, her eyes brightened slightly. She stood up slowly, not as an animal preparing to attack, but as someone expecting company. Ethan smiled softly. "Hey, remember me?" She tilted her head, then pointed a claw at him. "Huh, man," she whispered, her voice soft and uneven. He nodded. "Yes, human," he said gently, touching his chest. The room filled with silence, but it wasn't empty, it was alive. She approached slowly, stopping just a few feet away, her silver eyes locked on his face. He noticed faint scars on her wrists, signs of restraints. Maybe years old, he felt a chill crawl up his spine. Realizing what they might have done to her, he spoke quietly. "Did they hurt you?" She didn't understand, but the tone made her flinch, her hands covering her ears. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, raising his palms. "It's okay." Outside the glass, the scientists recorded everything. "She remembers him," one whispered. "She's calmer than ever," another added. "Her brain activity is spiking. She's learning faster than our models predicted." Commander Ryn leaned closer to the mic. "Boss, move closer, see how she reacts to direct proximity." Ethan ignored him, speaking softly to the girl instead. "You don't like their voices, do you?" he asked. She shook her head sharply, her claws scratching the air. "They scare you," he said, and she nodded, trembling slightly. He reached slowly into his pocket, pulling out a small glowing cube, a hollow recorder. He activated it, projecting a tiny image of Earth spinning slowly. Her eyes widened, reflections of the blue planet dancing across her silver pupils. "This," he said softly, "is where I'm from." She stared at it, then pointed at the hologram. Man, home?" He smiled, surprised. "Yes, home." Her lips twitched, almost forming a smile, but then she looked away, eyes darkening. She murmured something in her language, a tone full of sorrow. Ethan couldn't understand the words, but he understood the feeling. The door's speaker crackled again. "Enough interaction," Ryn ordered. "Step back. We're introducing the stimulus." "What stimulus?" Ethan asked sharply before he could react. A high-pitched sound filled the room. "A sonic pulse used to provoke aggression," Lyra screamed, clutching her head, her claws slashing the air in panic. "Stop it!" Ethan shouted, pounding on the glass. "You're hurting her." "She's reacting as expected," a scientist replied coldly. But Ethan didn't wait for permission. He ran to her, pulling her down to the floor. Shielding her with his arms, the sound stopped, replaced by silence and heavy breathing. Lyra looked up at him, eyes wide with confusion and pain. Her breathing slowed as she realized he was holding her, not harming her. Her claws rested against his chest, but she didn't scratch. Instead, she made a sound more a soft, broken hum. Like a frightened child trying to calm herself, Ethan whispered gently, "It's okay. I'm here." The glass behind him was filled with stunned faces. "Impossible," one of the scientists breathed. She didn't attack, she accepted contact. For a long moment, they just stayed there, Ethan's hand resting on her shoulder, her glowing skin flickering faintly under the dim lights. She closed her eyes, resting her forehead lightly against his uniform. It wasn't an attack, it was trust, fragile and real outside. Ryn barked orders, "Get him out of there! Now!" Guards rushed to the door, pulling Ethan away. Lyra's eyes opened in panic. She reached out and made a sharp sound, like a word he didn't understand. He turned back, whispering, "I'll come back," before the door sealed shut again. Later that night, the observation room was empty except for Commander Rin. He replayed the footage over and over. Watching the moment she touched Ethan's chest, he zoomed in on the faint light that pulsed between them, a connection like energy transfer. He frowned, whispering to himself, "What are you, creature?" Meanwhile, Ethan sat in his quarters, staring at his trembling hands. He could still feel the warmth of her touch, the weight of her trust. He knew the scientists saw her as a subject, but he saw something else, someone trying to remember how to be alive. In the quiet of the night, he whispered to himself, "She's not a monster." Across the corridor, inside her dark chamber, the alien girl sat awake. She drew symbols again on the wall, glowing shapes that resembled stars, planets and a single blue sphere. Her claws traced it carefully, and beneath it she scratched one small word, "Human." The Bond days passed inside the cold halls of the research station. Each morning began the same way. The hum of machines, the flicker of blue lights, and the silent walk of Ethan Voss through the steel corridor. The guards called him reckless, the scientists called him lucky, but no one understood why he kept returning to the containment room. Ethan knew the answer. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about Lyra, the alien girl with silver eyes who whispered human like it meant hope. When he entered the chamber again, she was already waiting. Her eyes glowed softly, not with anger but recognition. She stood close to the glass before he even crossed the threshold. When he smiled, she copied him, a small, uncertain smile spreading across her face. "Hey," he said softly, "you remember me?" "Huh. Man," she answered, then tapped her chest. "Lyra." The sound of her voice made his heart freeze. "You have a name," he whispered. She nodded, her voice trembling but proud. "Lyra," he grinned. "Nice to meet you, Lyra." Outside, the scientists scrambled to record every moment. "She said her name," one whispered. "She just learned a linguistic bridge in less than 48 hours, another replied. "Her brain activity is off the charts. This shouldn't be possible." But inside the chamber, none of that mattered. It wasn't about data or experiments anymore. It was about trust. Lyra walked closer, curious about every movement Ethan made. She touched his uniform, tracing the patches with fascination. He didn't flinch, he let her explore. Her claws were sharp but careful, like she was afraid of hurting him. Then she touched the metallic tag on his chest, reading the engraved letter slowly, "E." Then she whispered, his breath caught. "That's right. That's my name, Ethan," she said again, smiling this time as if she had just unlocked a secret. That smile changed everything for a moment. The cold laboratory didn't feel like a prison. It felt alive, warm, almost human. He began teaching her simple words on water. "Light, food, hand," she repeated them eagerly. Sometimes wrong, sometimes perfect. When she laughed, it was soft and strange, like music from another world. Each day their conversations grew longer, not with words but gestures, smiles, and quiet understanding. But as their bond deepened, so did the tension outside. Commander Rin wasn't pleased. "She's manipulating him," he told his staff. "This is how these creatures survive. They adapt emotionally." "It's a trap," one of the scientists argued. "Sir, if this continues, we might actually achieve peaceful contact." Rin slammed his hand on the table. "Peace isn't the mission, containment is." Later that night, Ethan entered her chamber once more, even though it wasn't scheduled. He had disabled the security camera feed for 5 minutes. Just enough time. Lyra was awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor, humming softly. Her humming stopped when he appeared, her eyes lighting up with recognition. He placed a small digital pad between them, showing her an image of the stars. "This is the galaxy," he explained, pointing. "These lights are worlds." Lyra looked at the stars with wide eyes. Then she reached out, touched one glowing point, and whispered something. Ethan didn't understand the word. But suddenly the pad flickered. The point she touched glowed brighter. Expanding into a new shape, he stared, stunned. You did that?" She tilted her head innocently. "Lyra, home," she said. The coordinates on the pad began to shift, forming a new star map, one no human had ever seen before. It wasn't random, it was precise, organized, intelligent. Ethan realized what she had shown him. She had just revealed the location of her destroyed homeworld. He looked at her, speechless. Tears welled in her silver eyes, and she whispered, "Gone." He wanted to speak, but the moment was broken by the sharp tone of an alarm. Red lights filled the room, the door hissed open, and Commander Rin stormed in with guards. "What the hell is this?" he barked, grabbing the pad. "You bypassed protocol." Ethan stood his ground. "She's communicating, sir. She's showing us where she came from." Rin's voice was cold. "And what if she's lying?" "She's not," Ethan said firmly. "She remembers everything." Lyra looked between them, frightened, sensing the hostility. When Rin moved closer, she let out a low, trembling growl. Energy rippled faintly across her skin, bright lines glowing beneath her veins. The lights flickered, the room vibrated, and every electronic device in the chamber failed at once. Rin stumbled backward, shouting, "Deactivate her now!" But the systems were dead, completely offline. Ethan stepped forward carefully, his voice calm. "Lyra, it's okay. You're safe." Her breathing slowed, and the glow faded. The systems flickered back to life, power restored as if nothing happened. The guards aimed their rifles, but Rin raised his hand. "Stand down," he hissed, eyes narrowing at Ethan. "You've just become part of this experiment, whether you like it or not." Ethan stared back without fear. "I'm already part of it." Later, when the alarms faded and the facility returned to silence, Ethan sat alone in his quarters, holding the digital pad with the glowing star map. Her home, her loss, her pain, all encoded in light, he whispered softly. "We did this to her." Meanwhile, in her cell, Lyra sat beside the glass wall, humming the tune Ethan had taught her. Her eyes turned toward the ceiling, as if she could see the stars beyond the metal. Then she whispered his name again, "Ethan." And somewhere deep in the system, the sensors flickered once more, reacting to her voice, recording something new. A strange reading appeared on the main console. Unknown energy pattern, synchronization detected. The scientists had no idea what it meant yet. But one thing was clear. Something inside Lyra had awakened, and it was connected to one human, Ethan Voss. The truth of the experiment: the following night, the station floated silently above the dying red star. The metal hull shimmered faintly as storms of radiation danced outside. Inside the research facility, most lights were dim, most halls empty. But one room still glowed with the soft blue hue of screens. Ethan Voss sat alone, eyes fixed on a hidden terminal he had unlocked using his command clearance. He had to know the truth. Every time he looked at Lyra, he saw fear and pain that no living being should carry. She wasn't born a monster. Someone had made her this way, he typed fast. Breaking through the encrypted files marked Project Feral. Each document opened like a knife to the heart. The first file showed an image of Lyra before she was captured. She looked younger, calmer, her hair smooth, her eyes bright like silver water. A voice log played automatically. "This specimen demonstrates emotional reasoning and empathy equal to human level," a scientist's voice said. "Recommend further testing and emotional bonding to be suppressed." Ethan froze. The next file loaded. An image of soldiers burning alien cities. He scrolled faster, his pulse racing. The logs revealed everything. The humans had found Lyra's world decades ago. A peaceful planet filled with luminous beings who communicated through emotion. They didn't fight, didn't conquer, didn't hate. But humans feared their power, the ability to share thoughts and feelings. So they destroyed them, reducing their home to ashes. Lyra was the only survivor, taken as a specimen. Her name wasn't a code. It was given by her mother before the world burned. Ethan leaned back, eyes burning with guilt. He whispered to himself, "We called her Feral, but she's the only one who remembers what humanity did." Behind him, a soft light flickered. The door. Lyra stood there, quiet as shadow, the guards nowhere in sight. She had escaped containment again, and yet she looked calm, almost sorrowful. "Lyra," Ethan whispered, standing slowly. "How did you get here?" She tilted her head, her voice small. "You hurt?" He shook his head. "No, I'm not hurt," but she stepped closer. Her glowing eyes fixed on the terminal behind him. She saw the image of her destroyed world on the screen. For a moment, everything stopped. Even the air felt heavy. Her body trembled, the light under her skin brightening like fire. The screens around them flickered. Alarms pulsed faintly. She whispered in her language, a sound filled with sorrow and rage. Ethan raised his hand slowly. Lyra, listen to me. I didn't know. Her eyes filled with tears that glowed like molten silver. She touched her chest, then pointed at the images. They killed, her voice cracked. Why, humans? Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to answer, but no words came. He moved closer, slowly, until he stood right in front of her. They were wrong, he said softly. Not all of us are like that. Her breathing slowed. Her glow dimmed. She looked into his eyes for a long moment, and then whispered, Ethan. Good, he smiled weakly. You think so? She nodded, tears still glimmering on her face. Then she reached out and touched his cheek, a simple touch, but it felt like lightning. Suddenly, a rush of images filled Ethan's mind. He saw her memories. Her world of silver forests, crystal oceans, and beings made of light. He saw the flames, the ships, the screams. The sky turning red, he gasped, falling to his knees as the vision ended. When he opened his eyes, Lyra was kneeling beside him. Trembling, her hand still on his face, she whispered, Now, you see? He nodded slowly, breath shaky. I see. Outside, the alarms began to blare again. Commander Rin's voice echoed through the intercom. Containment breach. The specimen escaped. Lock all sectors. Ethan stood quickly. We have to hide. Lyra looked confused. Hide? Why? Because they'll hurt you again, he said, pulling her toward a maintenance hatch. She followed without question, her hand gripping his tightly. They crawled through dark tunnels, the sound of boots and weapons growing closer behind them. As they moved, Lyra whispered softly, Why, you help me? Ethan smiled in the darkness. Because someone should have helped you a long time ago. She was quiet for a moment, then whispered, Ethan, good human. Those two words struck deeper than any weapon. He didn't answer, but his grip tightened, silently promising that he would never let them take her again. When they reached the maintenance bay, they stopped beside a shattered viewport. Beyond the glass, the red star burned faintly, casting a dying light across the chamber. Lyra stepped forward, her reflection glowing against the glass, her eyes filled with sorrow and wonder. She placed her hand against it, whispering a soft phrase in her language. The glass shimmered, glowing with patterns that danced like starlight. Ethan stared in disbelief. What are you doing? She turned her head, smiling faintly. Remember, she said. The word carried a strange echo, as if her voice reached beyond the walls. Then she turned back to him, her expression calm again. They cannot take me, she said softly. Not again. Ethan wanted to promise her safety, but deep down he knew the truth. The entire station would soon be hunting them both. Still he nodded, then we'll run. She blinked, tilting her head. Run. Together? He smiled. Always. As they disappeared through the maintenance door, the monitors in the command center began flashing red. The system reported impossible readings, energy spikes matching those of a dying star. One of the scientists shouted, Her neural link is connected to the main reactor. It's reading. Emotion. Commander Rin's voice was cold. Find them before the entire station tears itself apart. And deep in the lower decks, as they ran through the shadows, Lyra's faint light guided the way. For the first time since her capture, she wasn't running from fear. She was running toward freedom, with one human who finally saw her for what she was. Not a weapon, but a survivor. The escape. The alarm screamed across the entire facility. Red lights flashed through every corridor, bathing the metal walls in a pulse of warning. Guards ran in formation, rifles raised, scanners sweeping every shadow. The command center echoed with Commander Rin's harsh voice. Find them both, the human and the alien. They cannot leave this station alive. Ethan and Lyra moved through the lower maintenance tunnels, their breaths short and fast. The air smelled of oil and electricity, and the floor trembled beneath their feet. Every direction looked the same, endless metal, flickering lights and danger at every turn. Lyra followed silently, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the dark, her claws scraping the steel as she moved. She seemed unafraid, almost focused, while Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. We need to reach the docking bay, Ethan whispered. Lyra tilted her head. Docking? Escape? Yes, he said quickly. There are ships there. We can get out before they find us. Lyra nodded and began moving faster, her movements smooth and graceful like water. Behind them, The sound of footsteps grew louder. Ethan looked back and saw flashes of light. Search drones. Scanning through the tunnels, he pulled Lyra behind a broken power conduit. Pressing his finger to his lips, the drones hovered past. Their red sensors sweeping inches away. Lyra didn't move, didn't breathe, her hand gripping Ethan's tightly. When the drones left, Ethan let out a shaky breath. "That was close," he whispered. Lyra looked at him, her voice small. "You afraid?" He smiled weakly. "Yeah, a little." She blinked, confusion in her eyes. "Why? You strong?" Ethan shook his head. "No, I'm not." Lyra leaned closer, touching his chest lightly. "Heart strong," she said. The words hit him deeper than she could ever know. They continued forward until they reached a sealed blast door. It was locked with heavy security, access codes, biometric scans, and a reinforced barrier. Ethan sighed. "We're trapped." Lyra stepped beside him, her eyes narrowing. She raised her hand and placed it against the panel. A faint hum filled the air, and the lights on the door began to flicker. "Lyra, what are you—" Before he could finish, the entire door began to melt. The metal softened like wax, glowing bright and then folding open like paper. Ethan stared, speechless. She turned back to him and smiled. "Open." He blinked, stunned. You just melted solid steel." She shrugged slightly. "Easy." They stepped into the main hangar, a massive space filled with ships, cargo, and soldiers preparing lockdown procedures. Sirens echoed above as Rin's voice came through the loudspeakers. "Attention, all units. Containment breach confirmed in Sector 12. Terminate on site." Ethan grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her behind a cargo container. He pointed at a small shuttle on the far end of the bay. "That one we can fly it," he whispered. Lyra looked at it, then back at him. "We run?" He nodded. "We fly, then we run." She gave a small smile. "Together, always," he replied. As they moved closer, a group of soldiers spotted them. "Freeze!" one shouted, rifles raised. Ethan pulled Lyra down. Blaster shots tearing through the air. Sparks rained down from the walls as bullets slammed into the metal around them. "Stay down!" he yelled, returning fire with a guard's fallen weapon. Lyra crouched beside him, her body trembling as her skin began to glow. "Lyra, don't—" But it was too late. She rose to her feet, her eyes blazing like molten silver. The air around her vibrated with energy. The soldiers opened fire, but the bullets never reached her. Each shot froze in midair, hovering like raindrops caught in time. A wave of light pulsed outward, knocking every soldier to the ground. Ethan shielded his face, the energy washing over him like a storm of wind and light. When the glow faded, silence filled the hangar. Dozens of soldiers lay unconscious, their weapons melted in their hands. Lyra turned back to Ethan, breathing heavily. "No more hurt," she said softly. Ethan stared at her in awe. You saved us." She frowned, confused. "Save? Good?" He smiled. "Yeah, Lyra, that's very good." They ran to the shuttle, the hangar door shaking as security systems rebooted. Ethan jumped into the pilot seat, hands flying over the controls. The engines roared to life, lights flickering green. "Hold on," he shouted. Lyra gripped the side of the seat as the ship lifted from the floor. The hangar doors began to close, alarms blaring louder. Ethan pushed the throttle. Come on! Come on!" Outside the glass, Commander Rin appeared on the observation deck, shouting into his comm. "Don't let them escape. Fire on that shuttle." Turrets turned and began firing, explosions lighting the air around them. The shuttle rocked violently as Ethan pulled it upward through the closing gap. One blast struck the rear engine, alarms flashing red. Lyra screamed as the ship tilted sideways. Ethan gritted his teeth. "We're not stopping now." The shuttle burst through the final gap just as the hangar doors sealed shut. Fire and smoke trailed behind them as they flew into the dark void. For a few seconds there was nothing but silence. Then the stars opened before them. Endless, beautiful, free. Lyra stared through the viewport, eyes wide with wonder. "So many lights," she whispered. Ethan smiled. "That's space." She looked at him, her voice soft. "We free?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, Lyra, we're free." But even as they floated away from the station, red lights still glowed faintly on the console. Ethan frowned. They tagged the ship, he muttered. They'll find us soon. Lyra placed her hand on the screen and suddenly the red lights vanished. The radar went silent, the signal erased. Ethan blinked in disbelief. You did it again? She tilted her head. Hide, she said proudly. He laughed softly, shaking his head. You really are something else. Behind them, the research facility spun in the distance. Commander Wren watched from the deck, fury in his eyes. Find them, he hissed. No matter where they run. Inside the small ship, Ethan leaned back in the seat, exhausted but smiling. Lyra leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. Her voice a quiet whisper. Ethan, safe now. He looked down at her glowing eyes, the faint smile on her face. Yeah, he said softly, for now. Outside, the stars drifted silently by. 2 fugitives, 1 human and 1 alien, bound by fate and something even stronger. And as the ship vanished into the black horizon, a new signal pulsed faintly through the galaxy. Unknown, living, and human in its heartbeat. Shattered protocol. The stolen shuttle drifted through deep space, its hull cracked and smoking. Every light inside flickered weakly, the hum of the damaged engines filling the silence. Ethan sat in the pilot seat, his hands trembling over the controls. Behind him, Lyra sat cross-legged, her eyes closed, her glowing skin dimmed from exhaustion. She looked peaceful, like a child sleeping after a storm. For the first time in days, Ethan allowed himself to breathe. They were free, or at least far enough that no alarms chased them anymore. The navigation system blinked uncertainly, half its circuits fried from battle damage. Navigation offline, the computer droned. Ethan sighed. Yeah, I noticed. He looked back at Lyra. You okay? She opened her eyes slowly, smiling faintly. Tired, but okay. He smiled too. You did good back there. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly, but peace never lasted long in a human story. Somewhere far away, deep inside the Galactic Council's high citadel, alarms began to sound. An automated signal from the research station had reached them. The data was incomplete, but one word flashed on the screen: synchronization. The council members stared at the report, their eyes widening in disbelief. A single human soldier and an experimental alien subject had created an energy signature identical to ancient forbidden technology. They called it the empathic code. It was something their ancestors feared, a force that connected living minds, capable of reshaping entire civilizations. Back in the shuttle, Ethan didn't know any of that. He only knew that Lyra was special, not just powerful, but something different. She could feel emotions like they were signals, and she could calm them, erase fear and share warmth. He'd seen her silence rage, stop bullets, and heal energy circuits just by touching them. Now, he was beginning to realize that she wasn't just an alien. She was a living bridge, a connection between what humans once were and what they could become. Lyra watched him quietly, sensing his thoughts. You think too much, she said softly. Ethan chuckled. Yeah, maybe I do. She tilted her head. Afraid? He looked out at the stars. Not of you. She smiled. Good. The shuttle's radar beeped suddenly. A fleet was approaching. Sharp triangular silhouettes of council pursuit ships. Ethan cursed under his breath. They found us. Lyra stood beside him, her eyes brightening. Fight? He shook his head. No, we can't win that. Not with this ship. She placed her hand on the console, her glow spreading through the circuits like liquid light. The ship's readings went haywire. The energy output spiked tenfold. Lyra, what are you doing? He shouted. She whispered softly, hide. Outside, the pursuing ships passed directly by them, their scanners sweeping through empty space. The human shuttle was gone, completely invisible. Ethan stared in shock. You cloaked us. You bent the scanners. Lyra smiled faintly. Light listens. He didn't understand how, but he didn't need to. He was witnessing something that defied science. Far away in the council chamber, the elder species argued. The project was never meant to reach this stage, one barked. She cannot exist outside containment, said another. But she does, and the human has bonded with her, replied a third. They watched footage from the lab, Lyra saving Ethan, touching his face, the energy readings rising beyond containment levels. She achieved synchronization, one whispered. A silence fell over the hall. That means, another began carefully, a human has broken protocol, the ancient law of emotional interference. No human should be capable of merging with alien consciousness, said the high speaker, and yet he did. Back in the shuttle, Lyra's glow faded as the power drained her strength. She leaned against the wall, breathing softly. Ethan moved closer, placing his hand gently on her shoulder. Rest, he said. I'll watch. She smiled weakly. You always watch? He nodded. I have to. You'd get into trouble without me. She giggled quietly, a sound like wind chimes. He realized how human that laugh sounded. In that moment, the universe didn't feel so cold. Hours passed when Lyra woke. The ship had landed on a small, forgotten moon covered in silver dust. Ethan was outside, working on the engine with makeshift tools. She stepped out silently, her bare feet leaving glowing prints on the ground. He looked up at her and smiled. Morning. She tilted her head. What is morning? He laughed. It's when a new day starts, when light returns. She nodded slowly, looking at the faint star in the distance. Then, morning is hope. He smiled. Yeah, that's one way to put it. Suddenly the ground trembled. A beam of red light shot down from the sky, striking the surface nearby. Ethan shouted, They found us again. Lyra turned toward the light, her expression calm but fierce. She raised her hand, her body glowing brighter than ever before. The red beam fractured, splitting into thousands of sparks that scattered like fireflies. Ethan shielded his eyes, shouting, Lyra, stop! You'll burn yourself out! But she didn't stop. The glow spread around her like wings of light. Her voice echoed softly through the thin air. No more cages. In orbit, the pursuing fleet systems began failing. Their sensors turned blind, their weapons jammed, and their engines froze. A massive wave of energy expanded outward, not destructive, but alive. Every living being on those ships felt something strange. Fear vanished, replaced by warmth, understanding, empathy. It was the same energy that had connected Ethan and Lyra, but now it reached across space. Back on the surface, Ethan fell to his knees. Staring in awe, Lyra floated a few feet above the ground, her body surrounded by light. Her eyes opened, glowing brighter than any star. Then slowly, she descended, the glow fading until only her soft, silver eyes remained. She looked exhausted, but peaceful. Ethan caught her before she fell, holding her tightly. What did you do? He whispered. She smiled faintly. I showed them. Showed them what? He asked, her voice barely a whisper. That humans can still feel. Above them, the fleet withdrew. They didn't fire, they didn't chase, they simply turned and left, their crews shaken by something they didn't understand. Far away, the Galactic Council watched in silence. The High Speaker stood slowly. Protocol has been shattered, he said. The human and the empath have changed everything. A younger counselor whispered, Then what do we do now? The speaker's gaze turned toward the stars. Now, we watch. As their ship rose once more, Ethan looked at Lyra. Sleeping quietly in his arms, he whispered softly, You really did change everything, didn't you? The stars reflected in her silver eyes as she murmured one word in her sleep. Together. Beyond the stars, the little shuttle drifted far from the council's reach. Its hull scarred, its engines quiet, Ethan sat beside Lyra, watching her sleep beneath the faint glow of the control lights. Outside the window, galaxies spun like rivers of light. Endless and silent, he had never felt so small. Yet never so alive. Lyra stirred, her voice soft. Where are we? Ethan smiled. Nowhere and everywhere. She blinked slowly. We safe? He looked at the stars. For now. She reached for his hand, her fingers glowing faintly. Then, we rest. They had escaped the prison, the fleets, the council, but they hadn't escaped what they had started. Their link and the strange energy that tied them together was growing stronger. Sometimes Ethan would feel her emotions before she spoke. Sometimes Lyra would finish his sentences without hearing them. It wasn't telepathy, it was something deeper, something ancient. It was understanding. Days turned into weeks. They repaired the ship slowly, using scraps and Lyra's strange power to rebuild broken circuits. Whenever she touched a damaged panel, light flowed through her fingers, bringing dead metal to life. Ethan teased her once. You're better than any engineer I've ever met. Lyra laughed, a gentle sound. Better? Human? He smiled. No, Lyra, more than human. She tilted her head. Then, both. One night the console flickered with an incoming signal. Faint, broken, ancient. Ethan adjusted the frequency until the voice became clear. This is Research Outpost 17. If anyone can hear this, the council fleet is gone, systems failing. Someone, help us. Lyra looked at him, her eyes full of worry. Humans? He nodded slowly. Yeah, survivors. For a long moment he said nothing, torn between safety and compassion. Then Lyra spoke softly. We help, he frowned. If we go back, they might capture us again. She placed a glowing hand on his arm. They hurt me once, but I still help. That is why we different. He stared at her. Speechless, finally he nodded. Then we go. The shuttle turned, its engines burning bright blue, heading toward the dying signal. When they reached the outpost, they found a shattered world. Wreckage floating in orbit, air filled with radiation storms. Ethan piloted carefully through the debris until they saw the survivors. A few damaged escape pods drifting helplessly. Lyra's eyes glowed brighter, and the energy around her began to pulse. The broken pods stopped spinning, their lights flickering back to life. Ethan's console screamed. External systems re-energized. She was restoring life again. Not with machines, but with will. They docked with one of the pods inside. Half-conscious humans gasped as the door opened and a silver-eyed alien stepped in. At first they recoiled in fear, reaching for weapons that weren't there. But then Lyra knelt beside a dying soldier. Placing her glowing hand on his chest, his breathing steadied. His wound sealed slowly like mist fading under sunlight. No one moved, Ethan whispered. She's saving you. The others stared, their fear melting into awe. When the last survivor opened his eyes, he whispered, What are you? Lyra smiled softly. Friend. And for the first time, the word didn't sound strange in her mouth. It sounded human. They left the wreckage behind, towing the survivors to a nearby moon. When the humans disembarked, they knelt beside her, not in fear but in gratitude. Ethan watched as Lyra looked up at the sky, eyes reflecting the starlight. He realized something then. She wasn't just free. She was changing the galaxy, one heart at a time. Back in the Citadel, the Council could not ignore what had happened. Reports spread through every system. The feral alien had saved human lives, not destroyed them, one counselor whispered. If what she carries spreads, the old order will fall, the High Speaker replied quietly. Perhaps it should. Far from politics and fear, Ethan and Lyra stood on the silver moon. Watching dawn rise over the horizon, Lyra pointed at the soft light. Morning, she said with a smile, remembering his word. He nodded. Morning means hope. She looked at him with warmth. Then hope is us. He laughed softly. Yeah, I guess it is. The ship waited behind them, ready for another journey. Lyra turned toward it, her voice calm and sure. Where we go now? Ethan smiled. Anywhere the stars take us. She took his hand, her light merging with his shadow. Together. The camera of the universe pulled back. Two small figures standing on a glowing horizon. One human, one alien, bound not by fear, but by understanding. The galaxy, once divided by power and war, now whispered a new word across the stars. Empathy. And somewhere in the endless night, the stars themselves seemed to pulse in rhythm, alive, as if the universe finally remembered what it meant to feel again.